His Holiness Jayadvadas Maharaj is now going to explain the last 6 chapters of the manuscripts. Maharaj.
Okay. Going backward first, this is a typical sample page from the first 6 chapters. This appears to be Srila Prabhupada's own typing. I'm quite confident that it is. All the Sanskrit is right in place. If there were verses cited in the purports, they'd all be cited accurately. Everything's single-spaced here, and it's Prabhupada's typical written English. So these first 6 chapters are done just like this, page after page, of what definitely appears to be Srila Prabhupada's typing, and that we have in our files at the archives. But then we go on to the next 6 chapters. This is from text 10 of chapter 7, and right around here, it seems, Srila Prabhupada first got his dictaphone, and everything changes. The English now is not Prabhupada's written English, it's spoken English. Blank, because the transcriber clearly couldn't hear what Prabhupada said, some Sanskrit here, means they're all different kinds of living entities. Just like the movable and the non-movable, just birds, beasts, man, they are moving, and there are other living creatures, just like trees and plants. They cannot move, they stand. But everyone, there are 8,400,000 species of life. Some of them are moving and some are not moving. But the seed of their life is K, Krishna, as it is stated in the Vedic literature. So this is clearly a transcription. This is not Prabhupada's writing at all. This is a typist who's hearing Srila Prabhupada speaking and typing it out. He's not hearing the Sanskrit very well, so he's just leaving spaces for it to be filled in. And this is the kind of manuscript that we get for the middle 6 chapters.
If we go back to the to the screen before that one, it looks very similar to the New Delhi edition of the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yes,
very similar to how it's composed and
it reads similarly. It reads like Srila Prabhupada's writing as we encounter it in those wonderful Delhi Bhagavatams.
Would there have been less editing in the first 6 chapters than in the subsequent?
Yes, there would, because when you edit somebody who's speaking, you have a lot more work to do than when you have, Srila Prabhupada writing. When he's writing, he's already got things quite refined, and you just have to work on the English and refine things some more. But when you get to his spoken English, he's saying the same thing twice, he's saying things a little out of order, you have transcription problems where they're not hearing it right, you have to expand lit into literature, and you have a lot more work to do as an editor when you're working from transcription. Yes, indeed.
Okay, so these were the first 12
These are the middle 6 chapters.
Yes.
And there should have been a manuscript like this all the way through to the end of the 18th chapter. And in fact, there was a manuscript like this all the way till the 18th chapter.
Can we look at the next?
But this is not that manuscript, obviously. What we have here is a retyped manuscript. I recognize that it was retyped by me sometime in 1968 when I first joined. I was given as one of my engagements a big stack of manuscripts from Bhagavad-gita as it is, partially edited by Hayagriva Prabhu, and asked to retype them.
The entire book?
Entire book.
For what purpose?
Well, partly I think to give me some engagement and keep me off the streets, and partly because at some point this book was going to be finally edited for publication as a complete edition, and so a manuscript was wanted for that. And one of the questions I asked was, well, do I preserve the editing or do I preserve the underlying stuff? Am I supposed to copy what's there in the original transcription as it was, or do I copy it, edit it?
What was your mandate?
Well, basically copy it, edit it. There were places where it wasn't fully edited, or there were places where there was something extra where you look at it and say, well, let's keep this anyway. Something could be made of it. But where something had been refined already, for the most part, I just copied the refined version because we'd still have the old original manuscript to refer to. So this is my typing. This is a carbon copy. You can see the fat letters indicating that it's a carbon.
What are these blue marks?
Well, here this is the copy that would have been used by the Sanskrit editor. One of these copies would have gone to the English editor, the other to the Sanskrit editor, Pradumna Prabhu at that time, and he would have gone through this manuscript and put in his indications of the diacritic marks. And then the composer, the devotee who was doing the typing, the typesetting, would have had one manuscript over here and the other manuscript over here, and used this one for the translations and purports and used that one to fill in the word-for-word meanings. Because Hayagriva and Pradumna were working in different places. So one had one manuscript, the other had the other.
Who were those composers?
Oh, there was, the first composer was Shamadasi, who was Hayagriva's wife. She was the first person to work on that old IBM Selectric composing machine. And then the machine moved to Boston, and a new crew worked on it. I was one of the composers. Palika Dasi did a lot of the composing. Between Boston and New York, we had many devotees. Balai Dasi did a lot of the composing. Mamata Dasi, Ragatmika Dasi, Nari Dasi. A lot of Dasis there doing a lot of work, and with great dedication, because that work was done around the clock. We had at first one machine, and they cost $5,000 a piece. So we kept it going 24 hours a day. There were people sitting in a cold basement in Boston, typing with their gloves on in the winter to get this book out. So,
within which time period was the Bhagavad-gita produced? From the beginning of the editing until it was a printed book?
I'd really want to refer to Hayagriva's notes on that to get the beginning dates, but it was either 1967, I would say around 1967, roughly. Could have been a little earlier, or it could have been peaked into 1968. But by the time I came, and later in 1968, he'd already done quite a lot. The transcription had already been long completed, and his editing was already pretty much done for his first pass. There was later a second pass. And just around that time, the Macmillan edition of Bhagavad-gita was getting ready also. The abridged Macmillan edition was ready. But then
so
later
how many years would that?
Well, that would have been like a year or so. Starting from before Srila Prabhupada had his heart attack, and going on up till stopping before I joined in 1968. So it would have been a year or so. And then the Macmillan abridged, or the Collier Macmillan abridged edition came out. And then later on, Hayagriva took up the work again. This would have been around 1970, roughly speaking. We get together all the manuscripts we have, whatever manuscripts he still had with him, whatever manuscripts we had at ISKCON Press, we pull it all together, and he gets the collection, and he goes through again, and he says, well, I don't like the way I did this, or this needs a little bit more work, or I'm going to replace this translation with that translation, and he gives it a fresh look and goes through the book. Then I'm the production manager at that time at ISKCON Press, so I'm looking at things also and sometimes asking him a question or two, and that's how it's going on.
And in which year did the first complete edition then appear?
That was 1972.
That was the Macmillan edition.
That was the Macmillan edition, right.
So why did you highlight?
So this is highlighted as an example of something that doesn't happen as much as we'd like it to in these last 6 chapters. In the earlier chapters, we have an accurate record of where we started out. For the first 6 chapters, we have Prabhupada's actual typing, and for the middle 6, we have what the typist heard, as well as he heard it. And nothing's going to be earlier than that, because the tapes are no longer extant. So that's as far back as we go, and it's to the first typed version. But here, for the last 6 chapters, the first typed version is dropped out of sight. it was there because I used it to type this. It was on file. But later on, after Prabhupada's disappearance, when I said, can we look at those manuscripts again to review everything? Where were those original manuscripts? They were gone.
Have they been found in the meantime?
They've never been found. I don't think we're ever going to see them. And it's a frustrating loss for us.
So this is as close as we can
This is as close, as far back as we can go. We can see the difference between this and the final published book, but we can't see the difference between this and the original transcription because we don't have those earlier manuscripts for these last 6 chapters.
Okay.
So what we'd like to have is what we have in those middle 6 chapters, a lot of stuff where we can go all the way back, but sometimes we have it, and this is an example. We have at the beginning the material conception of life, and therefore he becomes, I don't know what the beginning of the sentence was, he becomes peaceful as much as when we see he is not agitating. So you can see there's a lot of editing still to be done here. This is not a fully edited manuscript, partially edited. And then it says, this is described in the Bhagavad-gita, apuryamana achapra uryamna achapra, namely pride, arrogance, false prestige. Now an editor looks at this and says, oh my goodness, what is this? What am I supposed to make of this? You've got some unintelligible Sanskrit. We don't really know what we have here. Looking at it in 1967 or so, it's just those difficult words, whatever they might be. Namely, pride, arrogance, and false prestige. Well, what about pride, arrogance, and false prestige? It's not connected to what's going on here. It's just a sentence fragment. So what are we supposed to make of this? In this situation, well, the editor could have gone back to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, what's this about? But he wasn't working that way. Prabhupada was traveling around the world. There would have been dozens and dozens and dozens of questions like this. And I know from being there that he didn't go back to Prabhupada and say, Prabhupada, what about A? What about B? What about C? What about D? He just plowed forward, which is really quite consistent with what Prabhupada was asking for. He wasn't saying, make sure you get every single thing in there, don't lose a sentence. It was, get this book out. He was writing to me also, when is it coming? When is it coming? You said before, any day now, when is the book going to come out? So that's what he's pushing on. So an editor in that circumstance looks at this and says, well, this is really lost. There's nothing I can do here.
So what did Hagrid do?
So you cross it out. Oh. You cross it out. It ends before the highlight, and you go on to the next verse and keep going.
So the highlighted text is not in the printed.
It's not in the Macmillan book. It's lost. But now, in later years, we can look back at that, and for those who've been attending Bhagavad-gita classes regularly and reading Bhagavad-gita as it is, this becomes a familiar verse. Apuryamanam achala pratistam samudramapa pravishanti advat. You can really pick that up pretty quickly. And if you have a doubt about it, you look at it, at the text that's gone before. It says he becomes peaceful, he's not agitating. Okay, that's what that verse is about. Sashantam apnoti nakamakami. So this is, okay, we know we've got the right verse here. We know.
And it relates.
It relates. So we say, yes, we're confident that was there.
Well, how does the last line?
We look at the last line and we're frustrated. Namely, pride, arrogance, false prestige. We know there's more there. We know that Prabhupada said something more, but we don't know what. Maybe he quoted another verse, Nirmana moha jita sangha dosha, or kama krodha tata. We don't really know. We'd be guessing. We'd have to say, well, maybe this verse, maybe that verse, and what is it about pride, arrogance, and false prestige? We really don't know. So we're sort of in the same boat as the original editor, where we say, we can't recover this. There's nothing we can do here. And so that's what we did later on. We said, okay, we can recover this verse because we've got plenty to go on. But here, it's lost. And all we can do is say, gee, it's frustrating. If only we'd had those earlier manuscripts, there would have been more there. We could have pulled it out. But it's gone forever. We just have to be satisfied with what we do have.
Is it so important for the work that every tiny detail is preserved?
Well, you know how Srila Prabhupada's followers are. We value whatever Srila Prabhupada said, and we want to get every drop of nectar or every instruction. If there's more that we can recover from what Prabhupada wanted to say about the verse, we'd really like to have it, but we can't invent, we can't reconstruct from little pieces of a sentence fragment with nothing else to go on. So we just have to say, well, let it go. And we know that we do have so much in Bhagavad-gita as it is. So we have enough to keep us busy there, reading and appreciating and trying to apply in our lives.
You have more examples?
Now that one was from 1853. This one's from 1866 from Prabhupada's purport. And again, there's a little portion peeking out from the original transcription that we don't have in the book. And we can see, yes, here's something more. This surrender process is described in the blank, anukulyasya asamkalpa pratikulyasya parjanam. To surrender unto Krishna is described in the B, and then it ends and goes on according to devotional process as that one should simply accept such kinds of religiosity which may lead to the devotional service of the Lord, and so on. Well, we can look at this and we can see now what that quotation should have been. Right away, most devotees who've studied the books at some length will see anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam, and they'll recognize that this is the definition of surrender given in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Srila Rupa Goswami. And reading the passage that follows, they'll see the confirmation of that yes, that's what Prabhupada is doing is essentially glossing, that is commenting on or paraphrasing that verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So this is another example where we say, well, there was more there, and we can quite reliably understand what it was.
So the ... here, that wouldn't be Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu.
That would be Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, because we know that that's where this comes from. Anukulyasya sankalpa, it's quoted in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, or it appears in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So we can say yes, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu.
It's kind of peculiar that the transcriber would have heard the verse quite accurately, but didn't get the name of the work whatsoever. All he got is the first letter, is B.
Yeah, I could only speculate how that is. It may have been that the transcription was actually not quite that good, and that Pradyumna Prabhu figured it out from what the likely grammar would be. It's not quite correct in any case. Parjanam is not right, and asamkalpa is not right. But it's certainly quite close compared to some of the things you see in the middle 6 chapters. This is sterling. It's really quite good.
But he probably would not at that time have known that it's from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu.
Yeah, I really can't say what's going on here. Whether just the typist got extraordinarily better or considerably better in his hearing abilities and got it a lot closer, or whether Pradyumna helped him out on it. I really don't know. I really don't know what's happened here. All that we can say is that certainly we've got a very recognizable piece of Sanskrit quotation here.
It kind of shows that Srila Prabhupada was not consulted about this, because he most likely he would have told the devotees.
I mean, sure, if Prabhupada if you'd showed Prabhupada that and asked him what is this verse and where does it come from, it was certainly something Srila Prabhupada would at once recognize. So the fact that it's not been clarified indicates that he hasn't been consulted, right?
So what was done with the text that's highlighted?
Well, again, this is a text that was a portion of text that was crossed out, a passage that was deleted. Understandably so, because the editor didn't know quite what to make of it. So he crosses it out and keeps going because we want to get the book out. It's crucial to get this book out into the hands of the public. And so if we can't just stop here and meditate on it forever. We have to keep going, and he does. But
so in the printed work, it would go unto him, and then
Mhm.
according.
According to the devotional process. And it makes sense. It hangs together. The reader is not going to be perplexed or bewildered. So it's fine. We can say we don't have to worry here. And that's a responsible piece of editing. But going back years later, with more familiarity with the verses that Prabhupada quoted, we can quite easily recognize what was there in the manuscript and restore the verse that Srila Prabhupada originally quoted. So this is a fair representation from chapter 13, from chapter 18 to chapter 18. This is how it goes. Frustratingly, we don't have that original transcription to go by. We have a manuscript that, to a great extent, matches the printed book already, but we do have places where things peek through for us from the original transcription, things that are not as edited in the manuscript as they are in the final book, and where we can go further back in time. We don't have to say, well, that's what's in the book. We have nothing earlier. But we do have to stop here. We can't go back to an earlier manuscript because no earlier manuscript is in our hands.
Do we have the next pass of editing? Or is
I don't believe we do. For some of looking through the chapters, we have 2 manuscripts sometimes for a chapter, or 3 manuscripts. We have say a copy and a carbon copy, or we have a typing and a retyping. But again, for the last 6 chapters, it becomes pretty thin. The most we have, I believe, for those last 6 chapters is 1 manuscript, or maybe 2 manuscripts that are nearly identical. We don't have the richness of material to refer to that we have in the first 12 chapters.
okay? What's the next installment?
Well, next we'll talk about the sources that Srila Prabhupada consulted when writing Bhagavad-gita as it is, the acharyas that he followed in the tradition.
Sources in the form of books.
In the form of books.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Till
very
next
much.
time.
Hare Krishna.